putting their leaders out there? What are we looking at an evolution, or are we looking possibly just at a one-off in this one?
Great question. Yeah. And your other question?
Yeah, the second question is for Katie and Paul. Which of the leaders do you think would be a good replacement for Peter Capaldi as Doctor Who?
Okay. Let's deal mostly with the first question then. We're going to assign proportional importance to these questions. So, what do you think, Katie, about where we're going with debates? Because this is, we're kind of at a new frontier here. Is it just going to change back next time around, or are we kind of
I really feel like the giant jury, which is the viewing public, the reporters, the leaders, the parties, all of whom have their own agendas and their own kind of desires of what comes out of the debate process, all of that jury is still out. We're halfway through. We've now had 3 debates. We've got 2 more to go. I get the sense that there's been mixed reactions so far to kind of how both the formats have worked in terms of the single issue and the sort of broad base. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see more of a push towards an independent organization, actually not the Broadcast Consortium, because everyone hates the Broadcast Consortium apparently, but some sort of independent agency, possibly Elections Canada, who knows, just laying out some basic ground rules. And on the second, I'd like to say that it is actually time for Elizabeth May to take over as a doctor, because it's time for a woman and she's the only one available.
Okay.
First of all, to Rob from Ottawa, Katie's totally wrong. Obviously, Gilles du Sept, those piercing blue eyes are ratings magnets. He should be the next doctor. I think so. This whole consortium thing is really fascinating because it is still going. I don't think that many people realize that this standoff is still going. The Maclean's and the Globe and they're all offering feeds of their debates for free or at least a nominal fee to the consortium, and they're all sticking together. They're all saying, no way, we're not going to run any of these. And so this standoff, I don't know if we're going to know to the very end of who actually wins it. But I'm with Katie. I can't see us going through this again. At some point before the next election, there's got to be some ground rules written, because this has been a mess.
Just some sort of basic arrangement. I mean, it sounds so conspiratorial when you call it a consortium, but it is kind of a way of just deciding some basic logistics, which is things like, okay, what night are we going to have it? And when you have everyone sort of as a sponsor and as a co-organizer, you don't end up with branding issues that make other networks perhaps more reluctant to run something because it's from a competitor. I mean, that's sort of what's at stake here. I mean, with let's take CTV and Global, CTV probably wouldn't want to give a global run debate publicity, and vice versa, which is understandable because they're competitors. When everyone's in it together, there are those concerns, and it isn't branded as one or the other. So I think there was kind of a logic behind it. That's one of the advantages,
for sure. But I think there's also the fact, though, that we're seeing debates that are in prime time. We're seeing more debates this time around than we've seen in the past. I mean, I think the consortium typically wants to have one English and one French debate, and they want them somewhat skewed out of prime time if they can, because they don't want to interrupt their prime time television schedules, right?
Yeah, I mean, Katie and I have talked about this before, so I know we're in agreement. But I think the best possible outcome in the future is a mix of consortium and non-consortium debates. You got to have a few out there that everyone can turn on any channel and see. And then I actually quite like the idea of Maclean's or whatever, BuzzFeed or something wants to do like their own niche debate. That's great, but it shouldn't just be the only game in town.
No, I agree. I think a blend is an excellent idea.
All right, thank you for your call, Rob. Let's go to David in Sussex, New Brunswick. Hello, David.
How are you?
Fine, thanks.
I called in yesterday about the face covering issue.
Yes.
You and I are of like mind when you answered a fellow and said, what law says they can't? I agreed with that statement. I think it's a matter of the courts to decide. I think the far more important issues would be issues of the economy, etc. But what I wanted to address today was expat Canadians who can't vote and ones that are trying to run for public office. Now, it's in the news right now that a fellow flew up from Seattle, Washington to run against Stephen Harper. I don't know if he got on the ballot or not. But then you have a very notable Canadian such as Donald Sutherland, who's being much reported about how indignant he is that he can't vote. Now, if you look at the Charter, Section 3, all Canadians can run for public office and vote. So I think this fair election law will never stand up to a Charter argument. But over 1 million Canadians, who are Canadians now, can't vote in this election. I don't think that's fair to them.
So let me ask you then, you're saying that if somebody is born in Canada, therefore has Canadian citizenship, moves away when they are 6 months old, never comes back to the country, lives in Australia for 30 years, and then all of a sudden decides they want to vote in the Canadian election, they should be allowed to vote in the Canadian election?
Well, let's deal with Donald Sutherland and myself. I lived in Canada until 1987.
Yeah, I know there are lots of different storylines out there, and of varying levels of.
Let's not talk about 6 months.
No, but I'm saying because I'm asking, are you saying every Canadian citizen around the world should be allowed to vote? I know that there are people who've only been
waiting until this new law.
Right, but are you saying that's the way it should be?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so every Canadian citizen, even if it's
Sutherland argues, and myself, that when I ran in the election of the 38th Parliament, Elections Canada and I debated before the writ was dropped for the 38th Parliament, because I used the same argument you did. They didn't think I could run for public office, and I said there's no law that says I can't, and the Charter affirms my right to do so. And we went back and forth, the lawyers and I, with Elections Canada, and I did run in the election of the 38th Parliament. Now, I didn't think I had the right to vote, but I found out that I could. But I knew I could run for public office.
Right.
Since that time, recently, there's been a new act that says all of those people that could vote in the past no longer can. And I think if somebody's clever, they will take it to the Supreme Court as a charter argument. But in this election, which is within the month, they can't vote right now. They're excluded, and that's over 1 million voters.
1 million voters, but I think we at one point we found out how many of them actually voted, right? And obviously it's not 1 million.
Yeah, okay, but Donald Sutherland's a good one because he's the former
there are some
leader of the NDP.
Yeah, but there are Canadians scattered all over the world.
Effectively excluded a lot of people that could possibly vote against him.
Well, yes, but again, how many of them actually do vote? Thank you for your call, David. I understand where you're coming from, and I think there might be 1 million Canadian expats who are entitled to vote, but we're talking, I think it was in the thousands that actually did vote in the last election, right?
And who knows if they would every election. It's possible that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, and they kind of, if a big issue comes up. I mean, I have to say, I always think there has to be a really good argument for taking someone's vote away. I would always err on the side of, have your ballot. The possibility of taking one away from someone who should have it is far more horrifying than the idea of someone voting that perhaps doesn't have as good an argument as others. What's interesting is that there have of course been legal challenges about this. The government's latest legal sort of legislative attempt has been to get around what the courts have said so far in terms of you can vote when you're out of the country for a certain amount of time. I think, is it 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. But it is a lot more difficult administratively now. I mean, you have to actually go out of your way to get a ballot. It used to be that you basically registered once and it was sent to you and you filled it out and you sent it on back. Now it's a lot more complicated, and I do think that that's going to diminish. I suspect there will be legal challenges. It'll be interesting to see what becomes of them. But yeah, and it is. It never fails to amaze me how very passionately some people who haven't lived here for decades get about that vote, and I don't have a problem with it. I think it's kind of nice.
I get that argument, but there's the other argument, which is if you're going to vote, you ought to have a stake.
Oh, they do pay taxes. They do pay taxes. So if they're Canadians and they pay taxes back here, perhaps we should give them at least.
Well, not all of them.
Not all of them do, but some of them do.
But there's that argument, and I can kind of see both sides of this one, because there is the other argument that look, okay, we're going to actually step away and go to Tom Mulcair, who's speaking in Quebec City.
Première fois que j'ai l'occasion de m'adresser à la RCMP.
Well, I don't think I've talked to the Federation since 2008, but it's been a very long time that I know a lot of you here with me. With Jack Layton, we went through all of Quebec during 5 years, and people talked about the orange wave with an optimistic vision of what we could do together. And I don't know if you know it, but Jake Layton was on the municipal scene for 20 years, and he became president of the Federation of Canadian Municipality. And I will share a quotation from him. He said, Jack, ideas be banal or extraordinary, deserve to be promoted. During my 35 years as a public administrator, I started my career here in Quebec, and I've seen things that repeated themselves and that I've learned and then I've thought to me that we have to do things differently. When I meet people from the municipal field, I see that the federal is reinventing programs and we have to take a lot of time to implement those things, and we end up with a very difficult situation. When I was the Environment Minister of Quebec, we were facing a very concrete problem. It took too long to get a decision for a lot of environmental requests. And I did something very simple. I signed an agreement with the federal. Nobody renounced its jurisdiction. And the engineer were the only ones who were mad with us because they couldn't give their presentation twice. It shortened the process for a lot of people involved. And it gave a very good result. It's that type of pragmatic approach that we will have. And when I say that we are going to start to do things differently, it's by planning things ahead. I worked years and years in sustainable development. The main element is that we can't leave to future generation the debt of our generation. For us, it's different. This debate where